The checkbox was tiny, almost invisible, just a single mark buried inside paperwork most people would never read. But according to growing whispers surrounding Archewell's finances, that tiny checkbox may have become the one detail Meghan Markle wishes nobody ever noticed. Because while the cameras were focused elsewhere, while headlines kept chasing Prince Harry across events, speeches, appearances, and public controversies, another story was quietly growing in the background. A story built not on rumors, not on interviews, not on anonymous palace sources, but on paperwork. Cold, boring, stubborn paperwork. And the frightening thing about paperwork is that it never gets emotional. It never argues. It never defends itself. It simply sits there waiting for someone to read it carefully. And now people are asking whether one document hidden somewhere behind the scenes could explain why questions surrounding Archewell refused to disappear. For years, the spotlight followed Harry. Every controversy seemed to circle back to him. Every criticism found its way to his doorstep. But beneath all that noise sat another issue that was receiving far less attention. An issue connected directly to Archewell's federal filings. Deep inside those filings was a declaration stating that the organization's finances had been independently audited, checked, certified, officially submitted. Simple enough. Except according to charity watchdogs. That declaration has led to a mystery that has now stretched over multiple years. Because if an audit exists, where is it? That question sounds harmless at first, but the longer it remains unanswered, the louder it becomes. Think about it. If a document exists and proves everything is perfectly normal, why not release it? Why allow speculation to grow? Why allow critics to keep circling? Why let suspicion take over the conversation? Those questions have been hanging in the air for a very long time. And according to reports discussed by charity observers, requests for that audit were made repeatedly. Not once, not twice, multiple times. Professional inquiries, formal requests, the kind of request that usually generates straightforward responses. Yet what followed wasn't clarification. It wasn't transparency. It wasn't a quick explanation. It was silence.
Harry's heartbreak as the showbiz elite dumped the Sussexes.
The failure of As Ever is simply impossible to ignore, and more people are picking up on this.
Long silence. The kind of silence that makes people start connecting dots. The kind of silence that turns ordinary paperwork into a full-blown mystery. People who once dismissed concerns as routine administrative issues suddenly started looking closer because something else happened that made the situation harder to ignore. Archewell's California registration problems began attracting attention. At first, supporters argued it was simply a paperwork issue, a lost payment, a technical delay, a bureaucratic misunderstanding. The explanation seemed plausible enough. Then another compliance issue appeared, and suddenly observers weren't looking at one isolated incident anymore. They were looking at a pattern. Patterns change everything. One problem can be explained away. Two problems create questions. Three problems create investigations. And that's exactly why critics began revisiting old filings, old dates, and old declarations. They weren't necessarily looking for a scandal. They were looking for consistency. What they found instead was a trail of unanswered questions stretching across multiple years. Questions about filings, questions about oversight, questions about governance, questions about accountability. And those questions became even more uncomfortable when attention shifted toward the structure of the organization itself. Because here's where the story starts feeling less like ordinary celebrity drama and more like something far bigger. Most major charities rely on independent board members, independent voices, independent oversight, people whose job is to challenge decisions and ask difficult questions, people who can say no. But critics looking at Archewell began highlighting concerns about the small number of decision makers involved. Why does that matter? Because oversight only works when someone is willing to challenge the people in charge. If everyone involved shares the same interests, where does accountability come from?
Every new project is promoted like a reinvention. Every interview is framed as some way of empowerment, right? Every soft family moment is presented as authentic. And yeah, we see right through it, Meghan. But the public is starting to see that pattern that she has. And it always comes back to Meghan. It always comes back to, girl, what you doing?
Who asks the uncomfortable questions? Who demands explanations? Who pushes back? Those questions became impossible to ignore once financial figures started entering the discussion, because numbers tell stories that public relations teams cannot control. A headline can be explained, an interview can be spun, a narrative can be redirected. Numbers don't care. Numbers simply exist. And according to publicly discussed figures, observers noticed significant changes in donations and spending patterns over time. Initial fundraising success generated enormous optimism. The organization appeared positioned for major influence and impact. Expectations were sky high. Supporters believed Archewell would become one of the most powerful charitable brands in the world. Then reality arrived. Donation levels changed. Financial trends shifted. Expenditures became subjects of discussion, and critics started asking questions that nobody seemed eager to answer publicly. Where was the momentum going? Why were certain patterns emerging? What exactly was happening behind closed doors? Then came the issue that truly intensified the scrutiny: the audit. Again, always the audit. Because every road seemed to lead back to that same missing piece. The more people talked about financial oversight, the more important the audit became. The more questions surfaced, the more significant the audit appeared. The more silence continued, the more suspicious that silence started to feel. At some point, the story stopped being about one document. It became about trust. Trust is everything in the nonprofit world. People donate because they trust. Partners collaborate because they trust. Supporters advocate because they trust. Remove trust from the equation and everything starts shaking. And that's precisely why some observers began treating this issue as far more serious than ordinary celebrity gossip. Because beneath the headlines, beneath the public appearances, beneath the carefully managed statements, a simple question refused to disappear. If the audit exists, why has it become so difficult for anyone outside the organization to see it? That question lingered. It lingered through compliance concerns. It lingered through criticism. It lingered through public defenses. It lingered through every attempt to move the conversation elsewhere. And while those questions continued growing louder, another development was quietly approaching, one that would make the entire situation even more explosive. Because soon, the discussion would no longer focus only on filings, audits, or compliance issues. It would shift towards staffing changes, leadership departures, restructuring decisions, and a series of events that, when placed side by side, created a picture many critics found impossible to ignore. And then, just when critics thought the questions couldn't get any bigger, Archewell made a move that sent an entirely new wave of speculation racing through the conversation. The organization announced a restructuring. On paper, it sounded positive: growth, expansion, evolution, the kind of corporate language designed to project confidence and progress. But some observers looked at the timing and immediately raised their eyebrows, because timing matters. Timing tells stories words sometimes cannot. At the exact moment scrutiny surrounding finances, audits, compliance issues, and organizational transparency was intensifying, Archewell wasn't becoming easier for the public to understand. According to critics, it appeared to be moving into a structure that could reveal less information rather than more. That alone was enough to trigger another round of questions. Why now? Why this structure? Why during this particular period? The answers never seemed to arrive clearly enough to silence the speculation. Then came the departures, and suddenly the story became even harder to ignore. Senior figures who had spent years helping steer the organization began leaving within a remarkably short period of time. Public statements were warm, professional, respectful. Everyone smiled. Everyone thanked one another. Everything appeared perfectly normal on the surface. But observers who study organizations know something important. People don't only speak with words. Sometimes they speak by leaving. And when multiple departures occur during a period of intense scrutiny, people naturally begin asking whether those exits are connected to larger developments occurring behind the scenes. Maybe they are, maybe they aren't. But the timing becomes impossible to overlook. The questions multiply, the speculation grows, and the silence becomes louder. What made the situation even more uncomfortable was the fact that these controversies weren't occurring around a random corporation. They were unfolding around a charitable organization carrying the names of two of the most recognizable public figures on the planet. That changes everything, because charities aren't judged only by legal standards, they're judged by trust. They're judged by perception. They're judged by confidence. The moment confidence begins eroding, every unanswered question becomes more significant than the one before it. Then comes the legal side side of the discussion. And this is where things become genuinely serious. Not because anyone has been found guilty of wrongdoing, not because regulators have publicly announced dramatic findings, but because compliance systems exist for a reason. Regulators don't usually focus on headlines, they focus on patterns. Patterns of filings, patterns of reporting, patterns of governance, patterns of transparency. A single mistake can be corrected. A series of recurring issues attracts attention. That's simply how oversight works. And that reality is exactly why critics continue returning to the same central question. Not 20 questions, not 10 questions, one question. The audit, because that document has become the center of gravity, pulling every other concern toward it. Imagine for a moment that the audit appears tomorrow. Imagine it is released publicly. Imagine it answers every concern. The entire controversy could change overnight. Much of the speculation would instantly lose momentum. Many critics would have to redirect their arguments. Yet year after year, according to the allegations discussed by watchdog organizations, the document remains absent from public view. And that's why the mystery continues. Not because of palace drama, not because of celebrity feuds, not because of social media arguments, because unanswered questions create their own momentum. The most fascinating part of this story is that nobody needs secret sources to follow it. Nobody needs leaked text messages. Nobody needs hidden recordings. The entire controversy revolves around documents, dates, filings, requests, and responses, or in some cases, the absence of responses. And that absence may ultimately become the most important detail of all, because every day that passes without a clear resolution adds another layer to the mystery. Every week invites new theories. Every month deepens the curiosity. And every year makes people wonder whether the explanation is far simpler or far more complicated than anyone imagined. So here we are, a charity facing questions, an audit people keep discussing, compliance concerns that refuse to disappear, leadership changes that sparked speculation, a restructuring that raised eyebrows, and a growing collection of observers asking whether all these events are isolated coincidences or pieces of a larger puzzle. Maybe there is a simple explanation waiting behind the curtain. Maybe there isn't. But until the missing questions receive clear answers, the conversation is unlikely to end. Because paperwork doesn't get tired, documents don't forget, dates don't change, and somewhere behind all the headlines, all the statements, all the defenses, and all the controversy, one question continues hanging in the air like a storm cloud that refuses to move. If everything is exactly as it should be, why has the answer taken so long to appear? And until that question is finally settled, this story remains unfinished.